warm welcome from my side. We are running a bit late, so I take pleasure in inviting all my panelists to the stage. Dieter, Ulrich, Seki, and Michael is already here. Just find a seat. I'll have a seat wherever we are. So the idea for this, you've heard now the exciting, quite comprehensive introduction to quantum technologies, and the issue we're going to be discussing today, peace and security. The idea today in this panel is to dive deeper, because it's not only about cybersecurity, it's security, peace and security is a larger picture. So first, let me introduce this extremely eminent panel. I think it's really the best of the best. Well, without excluding anybody else, of course. I take really great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Dieter Bjerregaard, who's the Danish tech ambassador, and also as incoming EU presidency chair, a very instrumental personality shaping the quantum agenda in the coming year. Dieter is an extremely seasoned diplomat, working for the Danish Foreign Ministry already since, I'm not saying long time, because but quite some time. And quite exciting to learn that you were the first representative for Greenland, and also had postings in Nepal and Afghanistan, so not the easy posts. And also an expert on export controls, non-proliferation, and investment screening, and been very instrumental in shaping the quantum tech diplomacy agenda of Denmark. Denmark is quite a leader in this field. And then I have take great pleasure to introduce Ulrich Mans from Quantum Delta Netherlands. I'm a big fan of Quantum Delta Netherlands. I think it's the most exciting agency bringing together the quantum ecosystems, and there's so much to learn. So I'm very happy to have Ulrich with us, who's head of strategic partnerships and a real expert on the whole economic security agenda, so export controls and whatnot. And then we've got Seki Seskier, who's a technology assessment expert and quantum expert, working in Karlsruhe at the Institute of Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis in Karlsruhe, and also founder of a huge network, European network called Quantum QSEC. No, help me out here. I have it somewhere in my notes. But very much working on ethical, legal, and societal issues. But security at large. She also involved in a project in Germany for the Deutsche Bundestag on quantum and military applications. And we've met Michael Krelina, who's now working for CIPRI. I've seen my colleagues from CIPRI already here. The Austrian Foreign Ministry and also the Austrian Defense Ministry is proud partner with CIPRI on this project that Michael has just presented. The first ever, I have to say, in this comprehensive nature, a policy primer on quantum and peace and security. And we're very excited to be partner. So the idea is to delve now into a very interactive discussions. So maybe we'll start with Dieter as incoming EU presidency. Can you explain a bit to us how the Danish presidency sees quantum as a strategic element in our political discussions to come? We know the two main pillars of what we're discussing in Europe are competitiveness, maybe better framed as productivity and innovation, and technology, and on the other hand, innovation and technology on the other hand, and the whole security question of resilience and our capacity to defend ourselves. It's been already mentioned by Councillor Himmer and also Mr. Marek and others. And maybe explain a bit what we can expect, give us a bit of an outlook. But how do you see also the role of diplomacy? Whenever we talk about innovation and technology, normally diplomacy is not the first thing to think of. So what can be the role of diplomats in boosting innovation and technology development in Europe on the one hand side, but also helping with the security and resilience and defense pillar on the other? And maybe if you have time, talk a bit about EU-NATO relations. Let's just, as a start, a couple of buzzwords so we get a bit of an idea.
Thank you, Claudia, also for the wonderful introduction. When you asked me to join here, I immediately said yes, because you are a very dear colleague and you have meant so much also for for moving ahead with the EU digital diplomacy. So thank you very much for that. And I think, Michael, you made my job a little bit easier, explaining why we need to deal with quantum. Now I maybe can talk a little bit more about how we can do it. So basically, these critical technologies have moved to the core of geopolitics, especially these fundamental and transformative technologies. You put it quantum plus X, that will impact all strains of life and all sectors. So today it's AI, tomorrow it will be quantum. So it means it impacts our competitiveness, economic security, our hard security, all these areas. So, and Draghi has pointed very clearly out that we missed out on the digital revolution. We cannot afford to lose out on the next one, the AI, and certainly not on the quantum. And I think when we look at it, the good news is that actually we have not lost out yet in quantum. We are actually not in a catching up race. We are in the race for the future still. Yeah. And we need to keep it that way. Yeah. And it's not that easy. The competition is fierce. You mentioned US, you mentioned China, other countries. It's not always fair. Shared rules are not really followed so much anymore. Hard power is becoming more important. And in this geopolitical world, EU also need more hard power to protect all the values you talked about. So what we really see as an important role for us taking over from the Polish presidency is to really support the EU in leveraging the discussion in quantum across the board. We look very much forward to the quantum strategy that will be released in July. And we will do our best to really facilitate and promote the discussion across competitiveness, science, defense, and of course also foreign policy. And what do we mean? Maybe it's easier if I start with our own experiences in Denmark, building up a quantum diplomacy actually. So what we have managed is we have a national strategy where we really incorporated from the beginning, the defense and foreign policy aspects in this whole of government strategies. So with the strategy, we now in my team have 4 quantum diplomats, including a scientist working on partnerships, the whole diplomatic toolbox, bilateral cooperation, Nordic cooperation, engaging in NATO, building communities with NATO, industry, academia, multilateral engagement. And we have been busy, I would say. So, you know, when we look forward, of course, there'll be enormous important role to leverage these discussions also in EU, not only from a competitiveness perspective, but also from this more foreign policy and security perspectives. And how do we also leverage all the tools we have in the box? The digital partnerships we have with Korea, with Japan, with Canada also have components of quantum. We should, of course, use that in science, Horizon programs, with the UK now. So there are so many aspects that we need to leverage, and we will be really supporting that and these discussions in the half year to come before we have the Quantum Act, which is not a regulatory act, but more like the CHIPS Act with the funding and investments into European quantum. So maybe I should stop there just for a moment.
Indeed, I think you gave a good sort of first teaser to discuss this sort of the policy side on it. And I think it's very exciting to see the quantum strategy coming out and later on the Quantum Act. And I think there's more where we can go discussing. But thanks for the first insight. We'll have more time. Not too much, but a tiny bit. So Ulrich, introduce us a bit to the whole complex issues of how geopolitics and the growing competition that we heard about, from, the competition between China and US and the whole race that is coming to be staying ahead of the curve, how it shapes international cooperation, how the whole economic security agenda has changed, and how Quantum Delta Netherlands has dealt with this. I remember when I called you up, I think 2 years ago, you were telling me, well, we've made our homework. So tell us a bit about the kind of homeworks that you did and what we need to do in Europe.
Yes, thank you. I think we come from a world where global collaboration was the default, and we're quickly moving into a world where global collaboration is bespoke, is specific. The way we've done it, Quantum Delta NL, or the Netherlands in general, is the only country in the world that has a national quantum technology program that is run through a foundation. So we are not government. We are a non-profit. We work very closely with the different government agencies, but we've been able to think alongside and in parallel with government agencies. So we have looked at the landscape when we started in 2020, and we defined economic security for ourselves. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what you see in the global landscape, I think, is that bilateral arrangements, and Mikael already alluded to this in his slides, bilateral arrangements are becoming the norm. You are seeing that those who work on quantum technology with national programs, with large entities, with large funding, are looking for the right partners at the right time in the right way. And that's going to continue. And that is something different from, let's say, the global collaboration in science technology that we're used to. And NATO, did already allude to it as well. NATO is one example where you see those nations, 32 nations within NATO, working together in the transatlantic quantum community. That's something that Denmark's shaped, and the Netherlands now co-chairing. And this is really something that will continue, and similar arrangements will be there too. The European Parliament this week, for example, published a report that says Europe needs to invest in quantum collaboration with like-minded nations, such as South Korea, Japan, Australia, etc., etc. So you will see that these kind of collaborations will continue to be shaped, and that's also a chance for Europe, right? I mean, in Europe, we have the ambition to drive this, and we can, as Dieter says, we're not too late. Actually, quantum is pretty much a green field. And you hear a lot that Europe is at a crossroads for many different reasons, and quantum is in there. Maybe I can invite you quickly to close your eyes and think about a crossroads. And when you do, oftentimes you sort of see that junction in the middle of the desert with, signposts saying, 200 kilometers that way, etc. I would argue that the crossroads we're at looks a bit different. We are probably at a crossroads in the middle of the forest, no signposts, and here we are with 27, or at least a couple of people discussing what kind of signposts do we need? How do we want this crossroad to work for others that come after us? And that's a very different ballgame. Deciding on where to go when you have a signpost, much easier. And we have a lot of diplomats in the room, I think, or people in diplomacy, and I would challenge you. Because diplomacy is something, and I used to work in this space for better half of 10 years, it brings things together. It looks at the whole picture. It looks at the bigger picture, right? That's what diplomats are good at. That's what diplomacy can do and should do. But if you look at economic security, if you look at quantum, if you look at emerging tech, if you look at sovereignty, if you bring everything together at the same time, it's going to be very difficult to have that conversation. So one of the things we did, and that's answering your question, one of the things we did back in 2021 is to say, let's break down economic security into pieces we can work with. So we defined 6 different topics for quantum specifically that we think we should tackle proactively. Things like IP, things like standardization, export control, investment screening, knowledge security, supply chains. And for each of these topics, we developed action plans, we reached out to partners, looked at what we can do together, and that's how it works for us. And we've come to believe that the moment you have this discussion together with the people who work on cybersecurity, semiconductors, 5G, and AI, and you have the discussion mingle together, you're not going to get to a point where you know which signposts you need. So I would encourage everyone working in diplomacy to see and to think about which sections and which technologies might need a different approach and might have to be distangled or untangled from the bigger picture. Because we probably need both as we go forward with these different collaborations.
So unifying the fragmentation, but at the same time disentangle the unity. That's an interesting point, and we can discuss this a bit further. Also, picking up on what Dieter said, maybe talking about this later, the European dimension, whether we are fit for purpose for the complexity of the tasks at hand, because you mentioned the different policy packages and how difficult it is to bring it together. Disentangle might be then a different picture. So Seki. Seki actually just happened to be in town, and last minute got a call from me because unfortunately Andrea Rodriguez from Impact UI from the Netherlands, who was invited to speak about the cybersecurity and also the private sector dimension, couldn't be with us. She's unfortunately sick. Best wishes go to her for a speedy recovery. And Seki was in town, and I called him up. You have to come to my panel. And he said yes. So we didn't have really a lot of time to prepare. And the kind of questions that I was preparing for Andrea are not really, well, you can answer everything. Seki is a pretty holistic quantum expert. But I think the bridge that Ulrich gave would give a good header towards what we can talk about. You spoke about, and this is something that I think is such a big diplomatic question that is a bit underestimated, this idea that we are friendshoring. I mean, we see it. Globalization as we know it, the way open markets work, this is a world that's past, and we're moving into friendshoring and onshoring. Meaning that the whole idea of global cooperation, as you say, the default position is in shambles or more and more getting eroded. You work a lot on setting up a network that looks at responsible quantum development, so the ethical, legal, societal aspects. But you also look at the bigger picture. I know that you do a lot on capacity building and the questions of access to technology. Who has access? Who controls it? And what does it mean? And this is something we're going to talk about with Michael later, the quantum divide. So how can we unpack it? How can we, and now looking beyond Europe, Ulrich talked a lot about economic security, and this is a legitimate security concern. But at the same time, how do we balance it? Because we lose openness, we lose other possibilities to cooperate. What does that mean for researchers at large? If the open space is now restricted through research security measures and all the rest of it. So can you unpack that dimension a bit? And how you think that, because we've been talking a lot about security, right? Military applications, security, strategic deterrence. With ELSA, ethical legal society aspects, we go a bit more on the softer side. How does it all make sense to have a holistic understanding of security and human security as we understand it in Europe?
Thanks. So you can hear me, right? Okay. Well, I didn't use paper, so I feel bad. I'm going to read from my phone. So as Claudia mentioned, we are working on ethical, legal, social aspects of quantum technologies, and it needs unpacking a little bit, because when I go to events and say that I'm working on ethics of quantum technologies, people are usually, we don't want that yet. But what we mean, and I'm stealing a bit from Matthias here, what we mean when we are saying about ethics of quantum technologies, we try to frame it as soft law, trying to create or trying to explore the alignments and what is the shared understanding, what is desirable, what is permissible, and what is unethical modes of behavior in this community related to these technologies. And identifying what are our shared values which is a very common phrase that is repeated a lot in the European context. And how can we translate these shared values to design options through methods like value-sensitive design or ethics by design. And there are a lot of historical examples. For example, safety belts for cars. They were not introduced until 1960s, and there were millions of cars back then. And there were even fierce debates on whether they should be mandatory or not. We are not having those debates now. Safety by design, it's very common, it is accepted. And we should talk about this kind of a mind shifts, shifting of the mindset when we are talking about security. Of course, there's security by design or secure by design, but is it widely adopted? How can we, expand it? What does it mean in a quantum context? These are topics that still need exploration. And in that sense, it is kind of applied ethics that these discussions. And of course, this ties to the legal aspects because like legislation, regulation, they define the constraints and the boundaries of what is allowed. And well, there are already existing legislation like Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, GDPR, and they relate somehow to this emerging set of quantum technologies, especially quantum communication that Mikhail also mentioned. But this needs exploration, like how are these new technologies going to be, impacted or impact the regulations that are already existing. For example, there's the, so to speak, chat control legislation being discussed in different circles. And under that, like if it becomes widely adopted in member states, will it even be legal to have quantum communication networks for civilian infrastructure? We don't know. Will there be legally mandated backdoors or information checkpoints in quantum key distribution networks? We don't know. So these kind of things need further exploration and discussion. And on the social aspects, like do our societies really want 100% secure and private communication? Are they aware of the consequences of this? Are we aware of the consequences of this? Like these are the topics that kind of still needs exploration and research, and that's what we are trying to do for like different, so to say, clients. Like we ran a study for the BMBF, now BMFTR. Recently, as you mentioned, we are supporting, it's not the parliament, but it's an office of the parliament, technology assessment office at the German Bundestag, on military use, but specifically from peace and security policy aspects. Well, there's, in terms of the social aspects, like yesterday we were at Vienna Center for Quantum Science and Technology, and in the end there was a question from a student like, how can her voice be heard, like her opinions taken into account? And this is actually a good question, like how can we involve the wider public into the questions that I just posed? Because like, yeah, quantum is very expert oriented. It requires a kind of a certain high understanding of at least some principles or technologies to get involved into these discussions. And we need to bring society on board in a certain way, because like social backlash or refusal is not just a nuance, it has huge economic cost as well. Just think about the GMO debates and how that evolved into different paths for EU and US, or about nuclear debates in France and Germany. Like there are two different worlds right now because of how social resistance or social basically society impacted the development path. So when we are talking about like ELSA, we're just trying to explore these questions. So it's not just about being nice and being ethical and those kind of things. So again, it's not an issue just for philosophers or legal scholars or sociologists. The companies should also get involved. And in the quantum field, they are kind of to a certain extent, like big companies, they all have their like responsible quantum computing or ethics kind of departments trying to explore these questions because it's important for them. And this also ties to the question on the global divide, because like we need to bring everyone together, as Ulrich said, set the signpost so that the people can follow us. But you also mentioned this yesterday, like, let's say that EU is a trailblazer in certain fields, and if we have no one following us, then it doesn't really make sense, like we are going alone and then nobody is on board with us. Then would it really make sense to have the signpost if nobody is going to, take that turn with us?
I'm also worried about the question of whether multilateralism, as we in the European Union, can work if we're only, picking special partnerships and excluding a lot of thinking. So my theory is the way the European Union talks about effective multilateralism will be eroding too, and we see it already. We've seen it with Ukraine and the Ukraine crisis, where we went out asking for support, and countries from what they call the global south were rather reticent. And I think it all ties also to that question. Ulrich, I'm seeing you.
A quick response to that. I think the quantum community, researchers, startups, people who are involved in this, we have a responsibility to show that global collaboration works. As difficult as it is at the moment with the geoeconomic situation that we have, there is that opportunity that we have to show quantum is global and we can deliver this technology for the benefit of humankind together with people inside and outside the European Union. It's going to be tough in these times. It's more difficult than it used to be. But nobody's going to do it for us. And this technology is the first technology that gets out of the gate in this geoeconomic environment. Any other deep tech technology had a global marketplace to play in. A startup today, if you're a startup in quantum today, it's a very different thing from being a startup 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And that's both a challenge and an opportunity, and we really have that responsibility to show global collaboration is worth doing. And we need to earn that trust of policymakers. We're not there yet.
But Ulrich, if I may follow up, but are we doing it? Because right now, and that's my question that I was trying to get at, with economic security, we're talking export controls, we're talking about research security, meaning closing off research corporations from certain countries. And we talk about investment screening outbound, something you worked a lot with, meaning hindering European investors maybe to invest in certain countries because we are fearful. So a lot right now of the economic security agenda, which is not only about protecting or shielding off, it should also be about international partnerships and also strengthening our own resilience. But a lot of the focus right now is cutting off cooperation. And there are, legitimate security concerns. We don't do that just out of the sake of closing off, but we have come to the realization that we need to protect ourselves. Otherwise, in this different world, and totally. It's been talked about. But how do we balance? I think this is one of the most critical questions we have to tackle, and we've not been discussing it. We don't. That's my theory. Have a proper theory.
It's hard work. I mean, give you one example. One thing we did. We told our startups in our ecosystem. Back in 2021, we said export control is something that is driven by national security concerns, something you've never thought of because you're a startup and you work in a lab and you care about quantum technology, but you will have to. So follow our lead. We will tell you what you need to know. We want you to follow the guidelines. We will talk to the people that develop those guidelines and tell them what is sensible, what the right balance could be, should be. But once it kicks in, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you are seen as somebody who can be trusted, that knows the system, that knows what compliance means. Because if you don't, if you just say, I don't care, I'm just going to continue what I do, and I don't care what laptop I take with me when I travel overseas, then it's going to be more restrictions. And I think we, as the quantum community, have that opportunity to say, we know what we're doing. Yes, it's, of course, a dual-use technology. Yes, it is sensitive. Yes, these are geoeconomic times where we want to be less dependent on international partners if it's only one supplier somewhere overseas. But it starts with that trust, saying, I know where you're coming from. I know that national security is something I have to worry about too if I'm a quantum startup. And we've come a long way, I would argue. the awareness within the quantum community is so much further along than, let's say, the community working on 5G 20 years ago, or even today in AI is. I think the quantum community is much more aware of these issues.
Dieter, you want...
Looking at Dieter, which is probably...
there are so many aspects of this discussion. Maybe just first on how can we kind of promote the ethical discussions. I think it's still not a mature technology. We had to recognize that. I think if we compare with the AI, the ChatGPT moment, where really you had users engaging broadly in our community, that sparked also the societal discussions. That suddenly you actually had these discussions among politicians, even in the Security Council you were discussing AI in a context of peace and conflict. So there you are starting to have these very important discussions, and also look at all the speakers today talking about it in the introductory remarks. So there's a lot of work to mature these discussions, even internally in our own political systems, before we also can, engage even broader. So this is also part of what we will promote during our presidency, that we have mature the discussions to be able not just to read up from the papers, but actually engage and understanding. And we have to give each other a little bit of patience there, because it's very difficult to understand. So just, I think it's interesting to have this comparison with the AI, and where we only 2 years after this ChatGPT moments have all of these important discussions. So we will help also on the quantum, but also we have to be patient with ourselves. So and also on are we closing down? I think. We are looking at the world as it is now, maybe a little bit less naive, and I think that's needed. So of course we have to think more about security, economic security, and we are doing that. But I think we also, of course, looking forward in the EU have to, and I think if you look at the competitiveness compass and all the messaging we have had, partnerships will be a very important part of increasing our resilience and economic security, our competitiveness. So yes, it is another world. We cannot be as naive as you maybe have been, but there's no question that we need to engage even more in the future than we have done in the partnership part for the EU to become a strong and leading actor in this, and also promote our values. Thank you.
Thanks, Dieter. To Michael. Michael, you wanted to comment on something here, or?
Okay, so I would like to add what was said. We still, let's say, miss some general awareness. I give you 2 examples. For example, last week I was here in Vienna too, just over the street at OSCE on the event of international security. And, a lot of drones, a lot of AI, but the most attractions was paid to me with quantum. And the reason is that still the awareness is not enough. If someone is speaking about quantum, very often it's limited only to quantum computing. They don't mention all other use cases. Or actually, Claudia organized like 2 months ago this great event for policy and security committee ambassadors. And for most of them, it was first time they heard about this topic. So, and especially at this policy decision or diplomacy level, it's something that we should work on the first place. They know about it, and then we can exactly work on all those important aspects of what was mentioned. So I just want to raise this awareness.
No, you're right. I mean, sometimes people say, well, quantum, as you say, it's a greenfield thing. We don't even know when it ever comes to pass. And rightly, they also think of the quantum computers. Is it? How would you respond? Is it too early that we talk about it or not? I mean, I think it's a bit of a foregone question, right? But I think we need to make the case again, also about anticipatory governance, because people think, we might start discussing it, but do we already need to think about regulatory aspects, governance aspects, or is it
Again, I would turn it around. I would say that's part of our responsibility to make sure that people understand that this is a technology that is not 10 years down the line. And as Mikkel said, there's these different domains, and if you look at sensing, this is something that will come commercially available in the next 2 years, if not 3. And if you're in military, 3 years is tomorrow. If you are a strategic investment officer of a company, 3 years is, in 2 hours. So you really have to start thinking about these technologies, particularly if everybody in the diplomacy world says these are critical technologies. Every single country in Europe has nominated quantum as one of the critical technologies. And if that's the case, it's not going to come for free. You have to work on them actively. And we need ourselves to portray that, to show what is actually working already and what the impacts are with the initiatives that Seki is working on, for example. It's complex technology, absolutely. But who ever told you how 5G works? Are you using it? Yes. Do you care how it works? No. Same with a car. You have to understand what quantum functionality is. How it works, don't even go there.
Yeah, don't get intimidated. That's also, I think, I don't need to know how it works roughly, but the most important is how are the implications impact our lives. But maybe going back to one question that Michael raised in his presentation we have not looked into. I find it quite an interesting and underestimated aspect of strategic stability. And it goes a bit about, the tricky thing that quantum, and I think that makes it so unique. We can talk also about what makes quantum unique as opposed to the other technologies. That's a different road. But given that that's my theory, only about 20 roughly states have the deeper capabilities to go into, into quantum technology development. What does that mean for strategic stability? You alluded to it, but you didn't mention it. You mentioned the case of 2 nuclear states where you have an asymmetry. I will name it here for the sake of it, and you'd like to walk us through a bit this case, because I think that's a very interesting point on security and how it will impact it. Obviously, we're talking about India and Pakistan.
Yes.
Can you unpack this a bit further?
Okay, as I said, there is not much research. There is literally a research gap. Regarding, for example, this relation Pakistan-India, there is, let's say, one policy paper that focuses on this topic. And indeed, Pakistan doesn't invest in quantum, nothing, almost, a little bit in PQC. But India is pretty active. Last year, their MOD established a big quantum laboratory. So they are quite advanced in quantum communications. They have own startups in quantum computing, also activities in quantum sensing. However, as I said, a lot of these technologies, it works. It works perfectly, and especially in laboratories, those sensors are really amazing. But something different is if you have it in laboratory, and something different is if you deploy in those, let's say, environment where all is moving, vibrating, energy is limited, and there we have still a big gap in sense of assessment. I guess Zeki can confirm. We still don't know. Of course, we expect it will be something worse than we see in laboratory, but how much? And without that, it's very difficult to really estimate how big impact can be. For example, I will give you this case of inertial navigation. Okay, inertial navigation that is already today used for missiles. Okay, in case of missiles, it's relatively okay because the error of inertial navigation is integrated. So it's a function of time, let's say. So, and if a missile is flying a relatively short time, the error is not so big. Let's say tens, hundreds meters. But with quantum, it can be even more precise. In theory, how much is difficult? Say, for example, for missile. For submarines, impact can be pretty big, but it's a very indirect comparison. So it's a really great opportunity for a new direction in research in this sense.
Maybe as Siki, you want to?
Yeah, I can add something to go on how the technology, like you need to do the technical assessment. Like with quantum radar, it was a huge thing like 10 years ago, and there were a lot of hype about it, and then people, researchers went and explored the topic quite a bit, and like there were claims that, it will make, stealth irrelevant, and like, F-35, it will be money down the drain, but when we actually run the technical, assessments and the work, people kind of realize that, in theory, it is a very good thing. In practice, like it has a very limited range, like 1 kilometer at most. So you can't use it against planes. I mean, you can use it in very specific conditions, and it might very well be, provide you with some advantage. But like what is claimed 10 years ago, it's probably not going to happen. And but it is a good case for arguing like we really need to explore what is technically possible to do with these technologies in the real world.
Dieter, Ulrich. Dieter, maybe first?
Yeah, sorry. Of course, on the communication, on the sensing, it's more incremental development we see. On the quantum computer, this will be more of the, will we have the Q day, but we still don't know which road to follow to go there, just to be sure. So what is really important for Europe is really because the development is going so fast, there's so much investments going on in the US and in China that we really need also to promote, to protect this technology in Europe. And I think this is really a key message if we want to really influence the more global aspects, we need to be part of this race. So it is really it's very simple, but it's also really important to underline, because right now we really have a chance to be part of this development, also when it comes to the hard power part.
Absolutely.
To develop the
Maybe we can discuss that a bit too, Ulrich. I don't know what you wanted to pick up, but how do we create the market? The market's not yet there. How can we, as Europe, and I'm talking about public authorities, obviously, who are mostly going to be the market, how do you say, the ones who create the market. Are we there in Europe? Do we do enough?
We have everything in-house in Europe. And the only way forward is to build this European market. And even with our American colleagues and friends, we tell them the same thing. The best thing that can happen to the US is a large European quantum ecosystem. That's how this is going to move forward. And we have everything in-house, including investments, including the entrepreneurial spirit that everybody mourns about, and this is all so difficult, etc. It's there. We just have to activate it. And that's the difficult part, absolutely. But there's enough money, there's enough good people, there's enough talent, there's enough ambition. We just have to bring it together. And that's also part of what we hope the quantum strategy of the European Union, where that spirit, that direction is clear. And I think that's something that can certainly be done, and that's, again, the only way forward. One of the things I'm concerned about, I just wanted to chip in what Siki's saying on the quantum radar, for example. If we look at what's happening next month in The Hague with the NATO summit, we're probably going to come to some sort of historic agreement about investments in defense, which will down the line also include R&D in defense, particularly in Europe, because that's where most of the extra money is going, right? I mean, imagine 5% is huge. Imagine the European NATO countries spending 5% of the GDP on defense. How much that's going to mean for R&D. If that money goes to quantum startups, and that quantum startups working on quantum radar or something else by now, how do we make sure that a quantum startup is not basically forced to build one building that is doing something for the military with a closed door and something else? Because if there's money in that building or for that building, you might not do the work on the civilian side of things. So that quantum radar might be totally useless for the military in that building, well, the people in that building say, forget about it. We're just going to shelve it. Nobody uses this. And the civilian side might say, hey, hang on, but this is very interesting for ABCD. But there's no money. So in Europe, as we go into the NATO summit and the new Rearm Europe landscape, I would challenge ourselves to think about what are good dual-use arrangements. How do we make sure that the money going into the military also benefits the civilian? Because on the civilian side, that's where the scaling comes, and that's what we need to make Europe actually a leader in this field.
Definitely.
And we don't have that. We don't have the right dual-use procurement arrangements in place for quantum. We really have to work on this.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different discussion also on, do we need a new dual-use research program? But I think we are coming to a bit to a close, so I'd like to open up the floor to you, to the audience, and so I give you a minute or two to think about questions, or if I see popping up arms already, oh, yeah, okay, we can start already with Q&A now. I have the gentleman in the front. Someone hopefully will come and get you a mic. Sir, please,
well, thank
if you can introduce yourself.
I commend the panelists. Being a nuclear scientist coming 43 years ago to diplomacy, I was shocked that in diplomacy, despite of what I learned in physics and mathematics, 2 by 2 is not 4, it's 3, maybe 5, and negotiable. I saw tech diplomacy. Are you trying to help to go towards a new era that diplomats are committed that 2 by 2 is 4? And to what extent quantum, in fact, technology is going to help on that direction and change the whole dilemma? Because there is a dilemma. And you talk very eloquently about multilateralism and, of course, sovereignty. These are all questions that are in the daily life. When we talk about policy, diplomacy, and of course sovereignty, which is a very good title of the conference, these are the equations. Now the question is quantum, in addition to being accelerated and speeding and efficiency to being promoted, to help in these whole things for us in the future or not? What is the role of quantum diplomacy? I mean, quantum in tech diplomacy and the right diplomacy for the sovereignty and equality and also interaction of the whole world, real efficient work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. Are there further questions so we can collect them? Or if not, to give you another couple of minutes to think about it, and maybe you could you introduce yourself, Service, so we know? Okay, don't worry. Well,
I came here 43 years ago as ambassador to the IAEA, but I was director of nuclear center working with 200 scientists, just put the lab coat and came to diplomacy to Vienna. Now I'm, of course, the president of Vienna International Institute for Middle East Studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Who would like to take on this question, which is quite interesting?
I think with your history in IAEA, what is it? Yeah, the
IAEA.
Yeah, you know more about diplomacy than many of us. I think the Danish experience when we established the tech ambassador back in 2017 was really to leverage technology in a foreign and security policy context. So really understand that we need to engage in this field if we want to kind of, create a better world. And we see how it influences us in Denmark, in our economy, in our social life, in our security. And what we also did at that time was to say we need to engage with another type of actors, not only state to state, but also recognize the enormous role that tech companies are having. So we actually established an office in Silicon Valley to engage directly with those actors who are influencing us. So in diplomacy, I don't know if it's 2 + 2. We hope sometimes that 1 + 1 can give 3, but so sometimes it's it's building bridges to find the common interests. That's not science. It's how to try to avoid conflict. Is I think the best we can do. So no, it's not science, but it's really kind of to try to use whatever tools we have to avoid conflict and to build bridges between countries and nations.
And sometimes constructive ambiguity, is the best diplomatic asset you have up your sleeve to come up with a solution.
I can offer a slight philosophical answer to your question. 2 + 2 is only 4 if you put it in the same equation at the same time. And I would argue, when you look at sovereignty and the digital sovereignty debate and deep tech and what have you with it, you probably end up with many different equations at different points in time, and it's pretty hard to actually make that simple 2 + 2 is 4. So we probably have to do many different equations at the same time.
Maybe that's even, what I find so exciting about quantum is that it brings us to a different mindset. Because exactly 1 + 1 sometimes is not 2. You have to look at it in a very holistic, interconnected way, and uncertainty and instability is the norm. And how do we deal with that? I mentioned it yesterday with Seki at a different panel we had. I find one of the most difficult things in our time is that we always take data from the past and extrapolate it linearly to the future. And I think that's the reason why we always fail. And we know that. We know that you're pretty stupid if you keep doing the same mistakes and then be surprised that you always fail. And I think quantum, maybe could help us, even though it sounds a bit esoteric, to understand and be more humble about the fact that the future cannot be known, and that we have to deal with emerging challenges as they are. And we have some principles, we have some ethical guardrails and guidelines. We have, a world community, and we have to get together and find the right principles and ways how we want to deal with this uncertainty together. Because some will be more fearful because they have not the same resources to be resilient, and some have more. And quantum will be also a test case, and that goes back to the question of access to tech and how do we share, the scientific progress with everyone. There's a right, a human right, to benefit from scientific progress. But that human right is a bit put under danger with this discussion on security, and how can we broaden it? So I think that's also quite a challenge. Ulrich, I see you twitching, please.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why I think it helps unpacking it a little bit. I'll give you one concrete example. When we started looking at investment screening together with government agencies, we don't want just anyone to invest in quantum in Europe, for good reasons. But the regulation, or the people who think about regulation, they put it together with pretty much anything deep tech. So if you have a conversation about the semiconductor investment screening regulation and quantum, you treat ASML the same way as a quantum startup with 4 people. That's not going to work. And as you say, quantum might be something special, but then we have to also allow it to have, special treatment in a way, and not to be part and parcel of one big deep tech vision. And I think that's, again, it's on the one hand, it's easier. On the other hand, you need to keep the bigger picture in mind. I think that's the biggest challenge, to have people who understand both and to actually have the mandate to do both. Because if you have an office for deep tech or office of digital sovereignty, as a policymaker, AI and chips is much more important than quantum at this point. But as you say, if we just draw the line from today linearly, then quantum, when it becomes important, we haven't done our homework. And that's, I think, the key challenge for this room, to unpack that.
I see, nice hands. I see Cypri, our colleague.
Thank you, Sibylle Bauer from CIPRI. So you've all basically said that with AI we missed the boat, with quantum we have a chance in terms of governance and thinking about the challenges. So what would be your number one top recommendation for policymakers to prioritize?
That's an excellent final question to wrap up. And maybe we take the gentleman, so how should we prioritize? In Europe or worldwide? Probably in Europe. Let's start with Europe. To get this thing done. Because you said, Ulrich, we've got everything in place. We've got everything. So it begs the big question, are we there yet? I mean,
no, just get started doing this. I mean, again,
and where should we start? Where should we prioritize?
the Danish presidency has big ambitions on quantum. So that's something Dieter can probably explain a little bit more. One priority, I would just repeat the wish to think about that dual use arrangement, because down the line for the next 12 months, we will be discussing a lot about what's happening in the military domain, what's happening with rearm, what's happening in R&D in the space. And we have to make this right. We have to make sure that we do our homework here. And that's just the beginning. We really know where it's going. It's pretty clear where this shift within NATO is going and what it means for the European Union in terms of directions. But how to do it, we really need to get started now.
Dieter, you have some thoughts?
Yes, as I mentioned, this would be a cross-cutting priority for the Danish presidency to really leverage quantum. We have to learn from the past. We have lost supply chains. We have made ourselves vulnerable. We should not let that happen in quantum. We need an ambitious and bold and realistic strategy. We need to come together in Europe, and we will do our best to facilitate these discussions and the decisions that has to be made for Europe through the next half year. I hope to see many of you, if a little bit of commercial here, on a huge European conference, really our flagship in November in Copenhagen. Both, of course, on science, but this time also on a policy track and a commercial track. We will also invite the world from outside in to really showcase and engage. So our role is really very much to support this European priority and facilitate the needed discussions for joint action.
Exciting times, and I think there's nobody best than our Danish friends and colleagues. Sekir and Michael, I think we're coming up to the final wrap-up. What are your thoughts? From your experience, what do we need most in Europe? Where should we start to get it going?
I would say capacity building, like the Dutch, like what Ulrich said, like they have been preparing for what is here now for the last 5 years. This is not the case for most of the European countries, Germany included. So, like, we should follow your lead in a certain way.
And do the homework.
Yeah, and
on the government level, then.
Yeah.
Michael,
I would follow from my perspective, still this general awareness that's important to, and as Ulrich said, is from significantly our responsibility. But I think I see, especially Europe, on good way in this sense. And I also agree with Ulrich that it should be treated. Let's say, especially because, as I said at the beginning, I have never seen any other field with so strong dynamic between fundamental applied research and commercial development. My background is in high energy physics. No one from policy care about that, right? But here, yes, and still the quantum computer, for example, this different types of quantum computers can be in 20 years. So from this perspective, it's something unusual, dynamic, and we should pay attention to it apart from, let's say, other deep tech, which is, if I build today's AI startup, in 1 month I will have profit. In quantum, it's really, it's not sprint, it's a marathon.
Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up. So I thank you for your attention. I thank the panelists for their insight. There are so many issues we only touched upon, and some we haven't even touched upon, unfortunately. And you've seen how complex and how vast the issue is. So with this is a start. It's always the first thing, right? We are very much looking forward to the Danish presidency, where we'll continue and deepen these conversations. And rest assured that Austria will be at your side and fully support you in your endeavor. Thanks to everyone, and thanks to you. And I think now we're going to have a coffee. Well deserved. Thank you.